There are a couple of points that Ewan mentioned, of course, and our thanks to him that were mentioned that I will quickly sort of touch upon as well. For instance, he did mention the RVS, which used to be the WRVS, and the survey that they had made. I have the privilege of being the ambassador for the RVS in Wales at the present time. You also mentioned, of course, care and care in the community, care in terms of general sort of provision and the failings that we've seen recently. But in terms of opportunities and drawbacks, that's the title of a very short talk for myself. Opportunities and drawbacks, well, the drawbacks usually are encompassed around health. If you can overcome that, of course, there are many, many miles you can go and the many hurdles you can go over. Two words come to mind immediately, of course, dignity and respect. And we all expect that as a minimum in a civilized society. And that aspect has been falling short on several occasions in the past couple of years. Aging is a gift, especially when you consider the alternative. We have arrived at this age, consider the people actually who didn't make it. So aging is an absolute gift. There are perceptions about aging as well which are totally incorrect. Do you know I came across new maths fairly recently? Apparently, if we'd all had 15 months in all our past years, not 12 months, then when you get to 50, you're actually 40. When you get to 60, you're 48. When you get to 70, you're 56. And when you get to 80, you're actually 64. So really, it's all in the mind. If you can convince the other parts of the body to cooperate, then we are all laughing and bouncing here indeed. Also, we are a huge reservoir of opportunity and experience, and that experience should be tapped into so that the new generations can benefit from it, because in many cases we have seen it all before, because we have these new wonderful ideas that are suddenly set before us, and we have to ask the question, is it better than the old ways? And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's too complicated, isn't it? We want things directly, so that understanding, so that politicians talk to us in a language which is not hidden in words. Do you know, not so long ago I came across, when I was on a forum for older people for the Welsh Assembly government, or the Welsh government as they call now, and apparently the verbiage is such, I'm not facing retirement now, I am facing a benefit crystallization event. This is what they said. That's the same as something I came across in something in the Cynon Valley, where somebody had been accused of being a contemporary anthropological interactive observer. Now in Aberdare, he's a stalker. Say it as it is. We also have things to offer. How old was Gandhi when actually, I probably looked older than he was, but how old was Gandhi when he actually was very influential in India? How old indeed? No, the alternative to a dictionary you have at home, Roget's Thesaurus. Roget was 77 when he wrote that, you see. How about Colonel Sanders then of Kentucky Fried Chicken? He was deep in his 60s when he came up with that idea. So all these can flow. Winston Churchill, all of them, you see, at an older age. Scientists have invented processes that have changed humanity, and they've been very, very mature in the ages that they've sort of gone through. In every generation, and we've had them as well, you need dreamers and doers and movers and shakers and talkers and walkers. There are those who talk about it, but they're not propelling to actually walk it. Somebody told me, you see, that there are two kinds of people in the world, those who do and those who get the credit for it. I think there are three kinds of people. Those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who merely ask, what's happening then? You need the movers and shakers, and we have been there. You, by the way, are the movers and shakers now. You are the molders and sculptors of society and the generations that come up behind you. All of you are products of people you have met in life. Your aunties, your relatives, your neighbors, the one man in the street who was an expert on anything. Dai Gart in Brynaman. He called Dai Gart because he lived in the old toll gate. Dai was an expert on anything. He knew about the benefit system before the government invented it. You know, he was ahead of them. You needed men like that who could fill in your insurance form, your claim form, or whatever. But really and truly, it's going back to those businesses of being able to do things. Youngsters coming up behind you now are using you as a role model. Never believe that your children or your grandchildren don't listen to a word you say. 30 years down the trail, they'll be doing things and saying things because they saw you do them and they heard you say them. And you have been molded by the people who went before you, the people who left a mark on you, who had a place in society, who were powerful. There's an endangered species these days, aunties. There aren't as many aunties about as there used to be. I lived in a street of 12 houses. I had 12 aunties. I did. Only 2 of them were related to me. But the others were surrogate aunties. My Auntie Katie from Port Talbot, never married. She was a politically incorrect phrase. She was a spinster. She'd had her chances. There was a curate from Britain Ferry who was very keen. But he gave up the battle and went off with an usherette from the Albert Hall in Swansea in the end. But my Auntie Katie said 3 things to me that I remember even now. Forget about the sophisticated age. She said, listen, if you wash your hair, don't go to bed for an hour. You get the pillow wet, you get a cold. Put your vest on October the 1st. Take it off March the 31st, whatever the weather. And for a woman who had never been married, she said something quite strange to me, really. She caught me in the back kitchen of my grandmother's house one day and she said, come here. Being that you're a boy, and I was about 13, being that you're a boy, don't you dare cross your legs until you're at least 15. God, I wish I'd listened to her now, see? It's only in later life that these things manifest themselves and give you problems, of course. The other thing is that you're all unique. You have something to offer. You have a contribution to make. And the respect and dignity. Do you know, Alzheimer's was mentioned there as well. I'll say this right at the very beginning. There are regrets in life. I have regrets in life that I didn't rattle cages often enough. When my father died, in fact, I didn't rattle enough cages asking what was the matter with him because my mother didn't like fuss. She didn't like fuss. The doctors knew best, so we just took it all as read. When she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, now when I look back, she never had Alzheimer's. She never at any time didn't recognize me. She had diabetes that was out of control, it was, but it was too late, you see. And I'll just tell you a little incident when I should have rattled cages. When she was finally taken to a hospital, in a hospital in Carmarthenshire, I have to say, I'm going back some years, to be fair, I couldn't find her. And I went to the day room and I saw a pile of what I thought were clothes in the corner. And it was my mother. So I took her back to her room and she couldn't pass a window without wanting to clean it. When we got back to the bed, my wife said to me, your mother's got a mark on her forehead. And she did. So I called the sister over and she said, you're quite right. I've been away for 3 days. Your mother's got a mark. Now, she said, I don't want you to quote me, she said, but this health authority has said that if there's been an incident in a hospital and the relatives don't notice, no one is to volunteer the information. So I wrote to the specialist, who had been very kindly, and just pointed that out to him. He never wrote back, but I pointed that out to him. These days, of course, there could have been a problem, couldn't there? She said, we'll have to check your mother out. So they took my mother to have an x-ray, and she had a heart attack and died under the x-ray. So I should have rattled cages, and I didn't. In Aberdare, where I live now, I'm from Brynaman, on the Carmarthenshire side of the border, but I live in Aberdare because my wife is from Aberdare, and she was doing geography. I was doing geography, but it was no geographical survey that took me up the Cynnon Valley to Aberdare every Friday night. It was lust, it was. And I've enjoyed it ever since. I mean, living in Aberdare, now, really. But really, I went along to see a group of carers a few years ago. During the era, there was no support, no one to talk to. Not only was there a sufferer of Alzheimer's or senile dementia in the home, but there were at least 1, maybe 2 carers who were trapped as well. They never got out. And there was a lady there, very attractive lady, who had a locket, and she opened her locket, and there were 2 photographs. One of an RAF gentleman, good-looking man, and the other a good-looking young woman in RAF uniform. And they had met, she said, in Lincolnshire, in one of the aerodromes during the war. He was a pilot from Aberdare, bomber pilot, good musician as well. She was in the RAF, the Women's Royal Air Force. They married, and she spent her time with him, and he survived the war. He had 2 sort of tours of duty, which is over 60 bombing missions, which on the low of averages, he was lucky to survive. He now had Alzheimer's. He was in Aberdare. She was wanting a little porch for their terraced house. Now that porch was not going to interfere with the architectural span of this street at all. But he'd been an organ player, he'd been a headmaster once he returned, he was a good musician who played the piano in school as well. She could not get permission to get this little porch and one or two others, and she was on her own. Now there are occasions when you can have a discussion with somebody, and there are occasions when you can have a controlled argument with someone, or a debate. But beyond that, there are occasions when you have to very gently lean over, lift this fellow who's sitting behind the desk up by his lapels and say, now listen, good boy, this fellow was a war hero, what are you playing at? It's that respect and dignity that we should give. And there have been periods of regret in my life that I can do nothing about now. But we can still do it. And even with our peers, the ones who are the same age as us, some of us are better than others in health and in attitude as well. And there's no greater exercise for your own heart than lifting the aspirations of other people, just lifting them up. And this is a question of, for the youngsters as well, the new brave generations we have now. Hindsight, insight, foresight. You can never have the foresight to know where you're going without having the insight to know where you are, and without having the hindsight to know what brought you there. Who were the people who brought you there? What were the events that brought you there, indeed? What molded you and sculpted you into what you are? And there's that well of experience that they have to tap into. Also, you've seen this wonderful democratic exercise that's just happened in Scotland. 85% voted. Now, that's because it was a simple yes, no, and a hugely important issue. We, of course, elect representatives on percentages that are so low that if it was an African country, we declare it null and void. But they do go in, don't they? There's no argument about it at all. But you and I and all of us here, what a powerful lobbying group we are. We can tell any government, now behave yourself, or the next time you're out. These are our wants. These are reasonable. These are the questions we ask. We want you to give us answers. And there are incidents that don't help. I know that some of them are anecdotal, like the incident that happened outside Morriston Hospital last week. 15 ambulances queuing up. That's a disgrace. There is no excuse. There is no excuse for what happened, really and truly. Now, these are simple anecdotes. I've been having hospital treatment for one or two things, and in Prince Charles Hospital in Merthyr Tydfil, hard area at the heads of the valleys. Nothing but excellence can I report. Staff tremendous, service tremendous, and also the remedies tremendous as well. So you have to go with a general view. But I also believe that the anecdotal evidence is the front line. That's where people actually meet reality. You were talked about old people's homes and sheltered accommodation. A few years ago, I opened a few. Oh, it's an experience. I went around one home. I could not find the residents. This was 5:30. I said, where are the residents? Gone to bed, he said. Now, we were all there. He was there with his white lapels and his hush puppies, his executive, and his guests. They were having vol au vents and sherry. I couldn't find the residents. He said, they'd gone to bed. I said, 5:30? He said, yes, they're a bit tired. Now, one or two had senile dementia, but not all of them. That was unfair. Then I went to another one, and this new home had put a resident in every room that we toured through, you see. And these residents had learned some poetry. When I asked them, what's it like here? Magnificent. What is the staff like? Like the family. What's the cooking like? Gourmet. Until I got to one room, and there was a woman sitting in the corner, and I'll say it exactly as she said it. She pointed to me and she said, shh. So I went over and she said, do you speak Welsh? I said, yes. This place is bloody hopeless. Come and see me after. See? But what worried me was, if it truly was hopeless, and she reported it, what was her life going to be like during the inquiry? You need backup so that everything, is bona fide and no one is under threat because of that. It's extraordinary, though, really. All of you are patches on a quilt. Society is just a quilt, and you are just one patch on it. And every patch has its part. It makes the quilt stronger and more colourful. all that different offerings that you have. And Welsh, of course, I was at a conference fairly recently when the whole business of nationality came up. Are we truly Welsh? Now, in Wales, it's dangerous to ask that question because we were at the start of the Industrial Revolution, so people came from all over. They came from Somerset, they came from England, they came from the rural areas of Wales down to the valleys, to the iron, first of all, and to the coal. So, what is a Welshman? I was it was analysed by a Welshman once, and he said, of course, the Welsh, he said, are cultural, caring, charismatic, intellectual, intelligent, vigorous, vibrant, excitable, emotional, sensitive. If we could only be humble, we'd crack it, he said. See? It's that joy of mixing. The British are the same. Somebody told me the other day, the British person is really a person who jumps in a German car to go to an Irish pub to drink a Belgian beer. On the way back, he has a Turkish kebab or an Indian takeaway and sits on a Swedish settee to see an American film or a Japanese television set. And they're still suspicious of foreigners. So there is that. There is, of course, a way of knowing which you are truly Welsh, of course. Genealogy is very fashionable now. We're all into looking into our background. And if we go back more than 4 generations and we're still Welsh, you're very lucky. The nobles came from Suffolk. But my mother came from deepest Carmarthenshire, Caio, Pumsaint, and Criegabar. That's where we came from. I'll tell you a secret. I actually went up to St. Catherine's house when the records were kept there, and I found out in the first 10 minutes that my grandfather wasn't. The fellow who'd sat in the corner with my grandmother for years, having his dinner when he came home from the steer pit, was nothing to do with me at all. Because my grandmother had had a liaison in a cold winter or something. And her mother, my great-grandmother, had had a liaison as well. So we didn't know who my grandmother's father was, and we didn't know who my mother's father was, because my grandmother had had a liaison, and then she had 3 more children, you see. But, as was the habit in those days, if you were expecting, you were sent to a family deep in the country for 9 months, and came back later with a little sister, something like that. But the rumor was that my great-grandmother had my grandmother when she was 12. I've got to tell you, the age of consent in Carmarthenshire then was 13. So things haven't changed a lot, really. But in all cases, with my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother, oddly enough, they all worked in very posh houses around the Llandailo, East Carmarthenshire area. So whether the father was a servant, or more probably, the father was one of the gentry. If I could prove it, I own most of East Carmarthenshire now. And I was going to tell you, a true Welshman, of course, Lloyd George used to say, the Welsh should be measured from the neck up. That's the important bit, from the neck up. And then there was Vernon Watkins, the poet, who always said, you've got to make a mark in life. You've got to sort of see that people respect you. And he had a poem. Part of his poem was, when I went to the county school, I worked in a shaft of light. And there in a desk of wood, I carved my name, Die for Dynamite. In other words, he was going to go places. Gwyn Thomas was another with regards to heritage and so on, and lineage and who you are really and what you can offer. He said, in a low light and a following wind, I am a Welsh aristocrat, he said. In a low light and a following wind, I can trace my ancestry all the way back to my father. But no further, he said. Marks and Spencers will tell you who's the Welshman. Marks and Spencers, this is true. Marks and Spencers will tell you, if you've got an inside leg measurement of 29 inches, you are a true Welshman. More 29-inch inside leg measurements are sold in Marks and Spencers in Wales than anywhere else. If you've got an inside leg measurement now of over 29 inches, your ancestors will visit us. All right? So all of that. Also, of course, lifelong experiences, rich, so that people can tap into us. So that, say, if you get adversity or embarrassment, you can take it, live on, and bounce back. I've had 3 embarrassments in life. Oh, one was with the Bishop of Swansea and Brecon. I was a headmaster by this time, and he came to actually confirm pupils in the school of Pony's Vaughan, where I was, in the chapel, in the church at Ystrefell. And he offered communion to all of us there. Now, Welsh Baptist, unbelievably, I was a headmaster, but I'd never taken communion in the church. I wasn't quite sure of procedure. You know, in a chapel, the deacons bring it around, don't they? Yes. The bread and the wine. In church, you go up to the rail, don't you? Now, Elaine, a Welsh Baptist as well, in front of me, we queued up to have communion, and we were the last two. I was the very last one. And Elaine went down on the rail on her knee, and there was no room for me. So I thought, I don't want to be embarrassed here now in front of these children, in case I mess up the procedure. So I went next to Elaine, coached up, and pushed her up a bit. And as the bishop came along giving the bread out, he gave one to Elaine, he gave one to me. As he gave it to me, my leg fell off the rail, and my hand went up in the air. And the bishop took my bread back off me. Yeah? And Elaine, thinking it was a church custom, gave hers back as well, see? But fair play to the bishop. He leant forward and he said, "You're not from this church, are you?" You know? So we kept it quiet and had a bit of a giggle over it in coffee afterwards. The other one was Barbara Streisand. I went to interview Barbara Streisand, 9 o'clock in the morning, dressed entirely in pink, from top to toe. She won't mind me saying now, she's passed on, but under here, elastic band holding her neck up. Either side, piece of elastoplast holding the spare skin, you know, holding it up. But she was extraordinary as a woman. See, she was in her 80s, and she would lie down at 9 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock in the morning, and dictate her letters. Then at 1 o'clock in the afternoon until 3 o'clock, she'd dictate her novels. And she'd say things like, and she'd always finish at 3 o'clock, bang. And she'd say things like, Eloise was at the rail of the boat. She was looking out over the sea. The sea was balmy. The sun was just going down. She had a longing within her. She longed for Charles. Where was Charles, for heaven's sake? Suddenly she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around. It was Charles. He gathered her in his arms. Eloise, he said. Charles, she said. 3 o'clock, finish. You know? We didn't get any further. But the embarrassment came when she offered tea for us, sandwiches and so on. And she started on about Fergie. She wasn't a fan of Fergie. I said, I told him, careful about the marriage and so on, told him. So she stopped passing the sandwiches around. So next to me there was a plate full of biscuits. So I ate one, and it was nice. I ate another one. And I thought, well, Barbara, would you like one? She said, no, they're the dogs, they are. She said, and they were. And I looked down, and there was a spaniel looking at me. But you have to go through it. More recently, and I was so annoyed with myself. I had the great privilege of being at the unveiling of the memorial in St. Hennydd, where it was the 100th anniversary of the disaster of 1913, with a prior disaster to that. But that was last year, and then Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall came this year, and I had to say the story again, you know. But the story had to be shorter. But it was easier to be shorter because I could miss out phrases like 440 men died, and the manager was only fined £24, and the owner was only fined a tenner. So I avoided that kind of political slant, you see. But I was in Flanders for the unveiling of the memorial to Welsh soldiers, wherever they had fought. An extraordinary event. And I was doing the Welsh and the English. And there was a man messing around between me and the translator who was doing it in Flemish. It was her father. He said, do this, do that, do that. So I was thrown a bit. So all the dignitaries of Wales and Flanders and Belgium were there. But I mentioned Carwyn Jones's name 8 times. 7 times it was great. And then the 8th time it was Carwyn James. Slip of the tongue. In a slip of the tongue, I had made him a rugby icon. I expect an honour from him before long, let me tell you. But those kind of faux pas live with you, don't they? Really. But also it's, you know, the joy of being this age as well. I have come across great fellas. You know, I went to see in a sheltered accommodation not so long ago, about 6 months ago. And I went there and it was coffee morning. And the 3 of them were there. And these 3 boys were all in their 80s. And they all, in fact, had positive thoughts. And coffee came. And one said, he said, well, my shakes, he said, by the time I get to the coffee, by the time I get it back to my mouth, he said, it's all over the carpet and all over the saucer. There's nothing left in the cup. He said, I'm shaking away here on mine. And the other one fella said, don't you worry, he said, with my shoulder, I can't even reach the coffee, he said. By the time I go down there and reach it and then try and get it back, it's about 20 minutes, he said. It's cold by the time I get it. It's hopeless. I can't move, man. I can't turn or anything. And the other one fellow says, with my cataracts, I can't even see the coffee, he said. I just feel for it. But there again, he said, thanks for small mercies. Thank God we can all still drive, they said. See? but it's a positive thinking. Yeah. And age, there's no such thing as old age, by the way. It's always 15 years further on. I don't care how old you are, old age is always 15 years further on. Middle age has its symptoms. You know, you start getting uncomfortable at the sound of a dripping tap. You start getting a taste for bran flakes and prunes. And also, getting lucky means getting a car parking space near the door in Tesco's. And an all-nighter means not going to the toilet at all. Yeah. So we've all been there. We look at it positively. There's no problem with that at all. But really and truly, it's this business of respect and dignity. Enough money to be old and enough money to be ill, if you're ill indeed. And the business, we have a wonderful national health service in this country. It has to be safeguarded. There are flaws. We have to, in fact, look at it in every which way. I mean, I don't know if it's overloaded with executives. You know, I'll mention one, I won't mention where. But he said, have you heard about so-and-so chief executive? He's collapsed in a meeting, stress. He's leaving, he's got paid off. And I met somebody up in Edinburgh during the game, you know, Wales versus Scotland, and somebody said, oh, have you seen so-and-so? He's not looking well. And the other fellow said, well, yesterday he was looking great, his money must have come through. You know, so that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it's questions that are, I think, valued and have to be answered. Where is the money being spent, and could it be used in a more efficient way? There was a documentary recently on a hospital in India, and they were clinical in getting the best value for their equipment and so on. Their doctors worked long hours. They were a template to use. We're talking India here now. And a lot of people have gone to India for actual operations, or hip operations and so on, fairly recently. So then, it's this business of dignity and respect and allowing us to have that. And with regard to nationality, the Welsh have it with us to be different. The Scots have certainly been different now. The Irish are definitely different. Of course, they're independent and they go their own way. But understanding that people have something to offer. I remember going to Ireland to record a program, a television program called Celtic Corners. We'd been to Brittany and to Cornwall and to Wales and to the Isle of Man and to Scotland and to Ireland, just to compare and contrast how they live. And I'm a great believer in, you don't have to send anybody out there and spend money, but you can get the information for care provision and for how people look at the older person. Go around all the countries in Europe and cherry pick the best ideas that they have. You will form an utopia, and we can never arrive at utopia, but it's a direction to go. Just cherry pick the best ideas and bring them back so we become a place of excellence. Even at grassroots level, when you mentioned public toilets, that's been in the debate. Why don't we have a competition where we become the European champions of public toilets? Why not? Because really and truly, they are a necessary facility in various communities. But when I went to Ireland, I remember coming across a woman who was a six-cylinder woman, married to a doctor. But my word, when she was firing on them all. And she said to me, she was bemoaning the lack of colour and personality in Irish politicians these days. Roy, she said, they're boring. They're utterly boring. They're all wearing the same suit from the same hanger from the same shop. And it's mid-grey, dull, no personality, not like Haughey. I said, hang on a minute now. Haughey, when he was president of Ireland, was a womanizer, a gun runner, and a crook. I know, she said, but you knew where you were with him, didn't you really? All the others, of course, are a bit bland now, you're never sure. And in terms of a simplistic way to say we can compete as well, an Irish writer got up and he said, it's no wonder that we Irish have won so many Nobel Prizes. We are the best with the words and the poetry of all the Celts. He said, for instance, I always use the utterances of ordinary people. He said, when I'm in my writing, ordinary people and what they say. Now he said, There's a peripatetic priest that comes to this area every 6 weeks, and we all go because he's always on about the evils of temptation, and we all want to know which aspect of temptation will he be talking about this time. So it was the last 2 dances of the night, whereby the music slows down, you get a chance to get a foxtrot, a waltz, and a kutch, and a cuddle, and you go outside and passions become inflamed, and who knows what's happening. And as they left the church, he asked this ordinary man in a mac and a beret, he said, Sean, what do you think of that sermon? And instead of saying good, bad, or indifferent, out it flowed. He said, the pontificating of that priest, he said, from that pulpit, will have as much effect on the population of this area as a blackbird putting its droppings in the Grand Coulee Dam open for a rise in the water level. The Scotsman wasn't having any of it. He got on his feet, he said, we Scots are just as good as you Irish with the motivation and the poetry. I come from the Western Highlands and Islands where there were great injustices of men and women being thrown out of their crofts and sent to Nova Scotia because the laird wanted the land. There are poems about it. In the lone shieling of the misty islands, mountains divide us on a waste of seas, but still the blood is strong and the heart is Highland. And I in dream perceive the Hebrides. We were struggling now. Was our champion in literature sitting in the corner? Was he able to compete? He was on his 8th Guinness with Jameson whiskey chasers. Fair play to him. Up he got. He was from Pildy, Newport. He said, we Welsh are just as good in everything that you can do, especially in literature, he said. I got a poem, he said, that proves how good we are. This is a love poem. This is an Esther Vodig winner. Come to me in the night. Come to me in the speaking silence of a dream. Come to me with eyes as bright as sunlight on a stream. Come to me, my fair young thing. I love you above all others. Come to me on Thursday night when Phyllis is down her mother's. Yeah. So, we can compete. Now, also, finally, on a light-hearted note, in terms of this, I noticed that some of you are alone, some of you are with partners. For those of you with partners, luck go with you. You're very fortunate, because I personally believe that relationships are the most important thing of life, whether they be personal relationships or professional relationships. If your relationships are right, you can get over any problem. Came home to me when I, not interviewed, but chatted to a couple who had been married for 72 years on air, and they were both in their 90s. And I asked her, I said, Doreen, to what do you attribute this happy marriage? And she said something quite lovely. She said, well, Bill and I have been married so long, we've learned to see through each other, but we still enjoy the view. And I asked Bill, I said, Bill, you're 94 and you're looking like a 66-year-old. Ruddy complexion, vigor, strong. To what you attribute that to then? I tell you what it is, he said. When we got married, we had an agreement. If ever we had a quarrel, the one who was wrong would go out for a walk. In 72 years, I've had a hell of a lot of fresh air, he said. So, really and truly, there's a quickie as well, actually. You know, when we're a fellow in Aberdare, we men got a tremendous sort of habit in the valleys in particular of boasting that we are boss in the house. We're only boss in the house when we're not in the house, really. When we're down the club. And I remember one guy coming in and he said, oh, he said, my God, he said, Phyllis and I had a quarrel last night. They could hear us down in number 45 and we only live in number 4. Oh, it was a humdinger, he said. But by the end of the night, I had her crawling to me on her hands and knees. I said, oh, yeah, what'd she say? She said, come out from under that bed, you coward. Relationships are the lifeblood, really, of life. And also, if you haven't got a relationship anymore, then friendships are. Friendships are the lifeblood of a society. Don't forget what I said. You are a patch on the quilt of society. You have a contribution to make. You have a right to be. Respect and dignity. Society itself has a role to pay back. If you have a problem, Ewan will tell you. Get in touch with the older commissioner, the commissioner for older people. And then, I nearly made her old then, didn't I? But get in touch with the commissioner for older people. And then, of course, make your point. Because you are a huge lobbying group. And zero tolerance was the phrase used. I would rubber stamp that immediately. Zero tolerance. You have a contribution to make, and people should listen. Not only in terms of experience, but also in terms of need. So I wish you well. I hope your Christmas is highly spiritual and that the new year only brings good luck to your door. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi.